Hello everybody, it's me, Root Beer, and today we are continuing the Krysrain brain rot. So, if you watched the last video, I went over the various different ride line options you can consider with Krysrain. This time we're going into a sort of deck profile, so the thing about Krysrain is that the deck is very open-ended, read bad, which means that I kinda have a bit of a tough time hashing out like a finalized list. So instead of just a straightforward deck profile, I figured we could go over all of the various options that I have considered to put into the deck. You know, what are the kind of like must-have cards, and then cards I would probably feel very reluctant to cut out, and then digging down into the dregs to try and solve the many problems that the deck has. So, with that, let's get into it, shall we? I have the ride deck here just because it, like, makes me put a ride deck, but quite frankly, you should just go watch the other video for me to discuss all the ride line options. I'm putting the Astasis one because that's the one I'm kind of putting in the forefront of my mind right now. Like, I kind of like what it does for the deck. So, briefly, if you didn't watch the other one, like, the grade 1 lets you bring back a grade 1 or less from your drop zone, and then the grade 2 bounces something back to your hand, so you know, in set 2, we're going to get a new rearguard called Franket that lets you bounce things, so when you combine it with Yuika, that gives you a decent amount of early pressure, and I figure running the Astasis ride line means having to think less early, because I don't have to worry about discarding as much, right? Because, like, grade 1, it's kind of free, any of the grade 1, or even just a trigger, you can, like, get it back afterwards. And then it also allows you to, like, aggro a little bit with suboptimal hands, so if you didn't find Yuika early, you can attack with it. But anyways, I digress. Let's get into the actual, like, main deck discussion. So first things first, in terms of, like, the must-haves, we have Anis. So this is a dedicated Krysrain support card. When it's placed on Rearguard Circle, if you have grade 3 or greater with Krysrain, Counterblast, Energy Blast 3, and then look at the top 5 cards, call a unit with a different name than anything you currently have, and then shuffle the deck. And then if it attacks grade 3 or greater unit, if you have 4 or more units with different names, it gets plus 10k. So this does do a lot for you, because Krysrain is this, like, pseudo Highlander ability where you need to have, like, 5 different names. Then, like, this helps you to, like, build your board, and then it's also just a big beater, especially if you're going second, which is really nice. After that, we have the other dedicated Krysrain support, Realm. So, gains 5k if you have a Krysrain, and then when it boosts your Vanguard with Krysrain, and you have 4 or more different names, you can Energy Blast 3 until end of battle. When your opponent would call cards without the Sentinel ability, they have to call 3 or more different grades. So this is kind of a way to get to Krysrain's win con. So what I think Bushiroad intends you to do is that you have Realm, you boost the Krysrain, and then you can kind of force your opponent to call out their PGs, even with, like, suboptimal numbers. Either that, or they could just, like, take the hit, or they devastate their hand trying to, like, block in this really awkward way. So you kind of force out their PGs, and then that opens them up to being hit with the Divine skill. So, and of course, in those situations where they don't have the Sentinel, if you're paying close attention to, like, what they're drawing and their drive checks, then you can maybe see, like, okay, well, they didn't search or drive check a Sentinel, which means, you know, this has a decent chance of connecting, and you can, like, boost up your Krysrain and put your opponent in a really bad position. And then, finally, for the must-haves, we have, of course, Yuika, kind of a staple of Lyrical at this point. So when your other unit is placed in the same column, and your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3, it gets 5k, and then at the end of the battle it boosted a rearguard, you Soul Blast 1, bounce that rearguard back to your hand. So this has become, like, the Lyrical staple. It is really good for just early gaming your opponent. You can then bounce back your card and, like, not have to worry about damage denial. Especially right now against things like Varga, for example, that has the front row retire. You can use it to protect your key units. And then, of course, things like Anis that have an on-play ability, you can kind of recycle that. After the must-haves, we have the cards that are not like super duper necessary, but I would be a little bit reluctant to cut. So we have Adelheid here. So this is like the grade 3 cycle card from Festival Collection. They all have the same, like when your opponent checks a trigger, 10k power and shield. And then at the end of the battle, attacked while boosted, you can Soul Blast 1 and then bounce a rearguard back to your hand and remove an over trigger from your drop, call a card with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard to rearguard circle. So in the event that you draw and use your over trigger and it's in the drop zone, this can be an additional attack. So either like setting up on the Divine Skill turn for a 5th attack, or if the Divine Skill turn kind of wipes your opponent, they don't really have a ton of resources and they have a kind of turn afterwards, this can be like a 4th attack to kind of get you over the finish line. So it also functions as additional shield, like if your opponent happens to check a trigger and you just need that extra 10k, so that's always good. So, not the most necessary card, but, you know, I would be reluctant to cut it. Also, being able to bounce back the back row in the same column is a way, like, if you're playing the Astasis ride line like I am, and you call, like, a trigger or something, then this can bounce it back to your hand, which is nice. Next up is the order package. So we have Ethnida. So this is the grade 1, so when you play a normal order, it gets 5k, and then when it's placed on rearguard circle, you counterblast 1, search your deck for Pretty Demon Chord, reveal it, put it in your hand, blah 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 blah. Pretty Demon Chord is an order that at the end of the turn, you choose one of your rearguards, it gets the red text. At the end of your turn, bounce it back to your hand. And then at the end of the turn, you can discard a card to put it back into your hand. And then we have Strega, where when placed other than by unit ability, if you played a normal order, you can Soul Blast 1, look at top 5 of your deck, choose a card less than or equal to your Vanguard, call it to rearguard circle, blah blah blah. Or put it in your hand if it's a normal order. And then when it attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, if it was placed this turn, you can counterblast 1, draw a card, and it gets 10k until end of turn. So, Strega on her own is, like, decently useful just for that second ability. Like, being a 20-30k beater that also draws you a card is just very handy. One of the issues that Krysrain kind of has is power gain. And so, Strega, even if you're not playing an order-based build, can be very useful for you. And then after that, like, Ethnida and then Demon Chord is if you wanted to supplement Strega and use her first ability more consistently, this is a way to, like, get you an order early. Ethnida is then also a 13k booster. It also thins your deck a little bit. The only real downside to it is, of course, the counterblast. One of the other issues that Krysrain has is with countercharging, which leads us into the next category of guards we get to talk about, which is all of the really sad countercharging that you have access to. So there is Ingrid, which is when it's placed on rear other than from hand, you can countercharge 1, and then stand something in the same column as it. That second one is probably not very relevant, it was designed for Felty Rosa. And then on attack, you can have it gain 5,000 power until end of battle, and then at the end of that battle, you bottom deck it, which is mandatory. So, probably your most consistent option for countercharging. If you hit it off of Anis or Strega, then that just gets you a free countercharge. And, you know, so in the case of Anis, that's just a direct refund. In the case of Strega, you know, if you are playing the Demon Chord package, you know, you're probably going to counterblast 1 to search out the Demon Chord, so Ingrid can help to refund that. After that, we have the kinda less good options, so there's LV, which I tried it, did not love it, so all rearguards with different names cannot be chosen by your opponent's card effects, which I feel like never came up. Also, Vargo just bypasses it anyways, and then the more important thing, on hit, countercharge 1, so obvious problem, it's an on hit, but also doesn't gain any power, so, you know, the deck is already kind of lacking in offense from not having any additional attacks outside the Divine Skill. I feel like a card like this is just bait. Like, you think because you need the counter charge, like, oh, well, if this connects, that gets me another activation of, like, Strega or Anis, but, you know, realistically, like, the numbers are so weak, your opponent can probably afford to guard it, and even if they didn't, it's like a body on the board that just kind of sits there, and when it really comes time to push for game, is it really doing anything? And then, speaking of sad on-hit options, so Sylphia, which was designed for Hazaret, so when your other rearguard is put to the bottom of your deck, you can Soul Blast, gain 10k. That actually might be relevant because Ingrid's ability to, like, put herself back, which is kind of amusing, so on the chance that you didn't call Ingrid off of a card ability, you could maybe combo it with Sylphia if you opt to play both, and then Sylphia can be like an 18k that also has an on-hit counter charge, and she draws you a card, so compared to LV, there's probably like more potential upsides, although it's still not a great option if we're being honest. And then finally, for more order-heavy builds, we have Virginia, which is a double R from all the way back in set 1. At the end of the battle, it attacked while boosted. If you played an order, you can put it into your soul and countercharge. So, kind of does two things. Like, it gets you additional soul for things like Yuika or Adelheid bouncing back. It also countercharges, obviously, and the only requirement is, like, playing an order, which you can probably accomplish with, like, Demon Cord, or if you're just playing a more order-heavy build, like if you're playing with the Willista ride line and you activated Illumiraze that turn, like that could be something, although in that situation you might not have Counterblast yet. Like, there's also this order, which we haven't quite talked about yet, but it's just an Energy Blast 4. No, it's Energy Blast 2. So choose 3 of your rear guards with different names and they get plus 5k. So it kind of synergizes with Krysrain's Highlander thing. It gives things power, which helps your not great columns, and also you can choose Krysrain with it, so it can help boost up your Divine Skill turn by giving an extra 5k to Krysrain. And as long as we're on this route, let's talk about other orders we can play. So, like I said, Illumiraze, if you're specifically running the Willista ride line, see the other video. This we just talked about. Demon Cord is part of the package with the other two. Forbidal is something you could potentially consider. So, if you're running Ingrid and Adelheid, those are 2 grade 3s that you could search out with Forbidal, and then that has the additional benefit of calling out Ingrid not from your hand, so you can get a counter charge. So let's say you use Krysrain's ability, then you activate Forbidal, you get the Ingrid, you can counter charge, and then that opens up your options for like later in the game to use Annis or something like that. And then of course there's the Grail, just Persona Ride. So it's an order to help with Strega and I can never remember this name, Ethnida. And it's just like a 4th copy of your Persona Ride. So, never a bad option. And then finally, just kind of the miscellaneous things. So we have Albina, which is just like the generic Vanguard support that they gave to every ride line, which is like plus 5k power and 5k shield. This is not the worst effect, honestly, simply for having that 5k shield. Like, defensive power is always important, and being a 13k booster is not bad. Like, if you are playing Adelheid, you can, like, boost it, have a decently hitting column, and then, like, bounce it back to your hand afterwards. We have Eileen, which is, like, stacking your deck, so because of the way Krysrain's Divine Skill work, where it copies the power and critical, you could potentially set up the OTK by, like, looking at your deck with Eileen and being like, oh, this isn't a trigger, let's put it to the bottom. Alright, now I found the critical. You know, so that's something that you can, like, kinda do, although she doesn't provide any benefit beyond, like, trying to help you sack slightly better. I think you're probably better served with the more powerful utility cards. And then finally we have the Jewel Cat. So, you know what this does, like, you return 2 things from the ride line, so extra shield value, which is always nice, and then the lyrical one specifically can get back the same name as your Vanguard, so gets you copies of your Persona ride, which did come up for me once, where I had to, like, discard a Krysrain, then I just called this and brought the Krysrain back, so that was kind of funny. Oh, and Resius. So, not finally. I'm really good at this. So when it's placed, choose one of your other units, gets 10k. So for your Divine Skill turn, slap it onto Krysrain, make the Divine Skill even bigger. Otherwise, can still get you, like, okay column numbers to your other rear guards. And then I also just put, like, all 3 of your potential over-trigger options. There are arguments to be made for all of them. I think the best one is the blue over-trigger. Like, just being a critical trigger on steroids turns out is very good, especially with the way Krysrain operates. If your opponent does play into the guard restrict, either by, like, not guarding or having to call the 3, then the over-trigger basically reads I win. But even if they do PG it, you can then clone the extra power, and do they have the second PG to guard like 100 million and 3 crits? The red OT, like, gives you, like, better offense early, like, you can just call something from your hand, or, because this deck already likes to just aggro a ton anyway, like, I like having a full board early, and you can do it moderately consistently, like, based on your ride line choices, then, like, checking a Valnot means, like, having 4 attacks early. The attack gonna be really big because of the 100 million, which is incredibly powerful. Like, this kind of has application all throughout the game. I think the only time where it feels bad is if you check it specifically on the Divine Skill turn, because then it's like, oh, well, I just, like, you know, attacked with all my rear guards already because I'm planning to bounce back my entire board, and then even if I call something, like, Krysrain's ability is just gonna, like, bounce it back anyway. So you end up in this really, like, weird position where you, like, don't get the benefit of the additional effect, because Krysrain's skill resolves afterwards, so you can't even, like, re-stand the Divine Skill unit. So, has a lot of upsides, and it's just kind of unfortunate that on your one specific kill turn, this has, like, the least benefit to you. And then, of course, just the default lyrical one, which is all your rear guards get 10k, so if you check it early, it's just a consistent power boost through the rest of the game. It's also a budget option. Like, it's not terrible. Krysrain puts up numbers. I believe the Divine Skill overrides the 10k, though, so if my understanding of the ruling is correct, the game will see, like, the plus 10k, and then, like, Krysrain's power reset will, like, set it to whatever Krysrain's is, which kind of overrides the plus 10, is my understanding. So there is also kind of that problem there. The Divine Skill kind of makes it really awkward to play with the other over-triggers. Alright. So now that we've kind of gone over the various different options that I've thought about... Oh, right. Also, the cycle cards. So, they have Prescia, and then I forgot to put it in the list, but also you have Valshablon. So, you know, they're good. They let you, like, recoup the losses of your ride line. But they also do have useful effects on their own. So, Prescia, you can Counterblast or Energy Blast, choose one of your units, it gets 5k, and if you chose a rear guard, you bounce it back to your hand. A way to, like, insulate your board against, like, removal can help to supplement the Yuika to protect your entire front row, and then Valshablon just gives you a continuous effect that all of your front row get plus 5k, which is also not bad. Like, again, numbers aren't great, this helps to make up for the less than stellar numbers, and then also buffs up Krysrain, which buffs up the Divine Skill. So, anyways, like I was saying, here are some sample deck lists of just, like, different things that are on my mind right now. So, first up is just kind of the non-order build. So, I am kind of sticking with the Astasis ride line for now. Again, see other video for a more in-depth discussion of all your various ride line options, but I really do like just simplifying away, like, what you want to discard early, and then being able to aggro relatively unpunished with the grade 2. So as for the rest of the deck, we are obviously running our 3 Persona rides, we're running 16 triggers, so we're doing 8 crit, 3 draw, blue OT, 4 heal, the 1 Sanctitude, 3 regular PGs. We have the 1 copy of the Jeweled Beast for the extra shield value, and, you know, sometimes you run into a situation where you need to recycle a Krysrain, and you do have ways to, like, bounce it back to your hand, so you can just, like, use it for the recycling ability, and then like later in the game, once you ride over the Krysrain in your ride deck and put it in your soul, you can like use it again for the shield value. And finally, we have 3 copies of Realm for the, like, must-have, so I feel like 3 is the correct ratio. The guard restrict ability is very powerful, but it's also something that only works when you're boosting the Vanguard. It's like a 13k booster otherwise, but also remember, you do need to have different names. You only really have space for the 1 duplicate, so I feel like replacing her with, like, other cards that have other utilities is just better. So I'm opting for the non-order build to just be running Albina. That 5k shield really does come in handy, and again, 13k booster is nice, and it's a different name. We're running 2 copies of Valshablan. The effect is decently good, like I said. It makes up for your mediocre numbers, and also helps to buff up your Divine Skill turn, but it costs a Counterblast, which this deck is not great at, and this particular build just kinda opted not to countercharge. Like, looking at the various options you have, all of them have their own unique downsides, and in the interest of deck space, I decided to just forego all of the mediocre countercharging options that don't do anything half the time, and just kinda like, just go for it, you know? 4 copies of Pressure, so it uses up energy, which is a resource you have an abundance of. The 5k is useful, whether that's just pumping up rear guards late game or boosting up the Vanguard for your Divine Skill play. And then, of course, if you do choose to like put something back to your hand, it's useful for that. Only 2 copies of Strega, so like I said with Valshablan, countercharge is at a premium, and we are opting not to do it in this deck, just in the interest of, like, space. So, only 2 copies of Strega. It's one of those, like, yeah, if you can manage it, it'll be very powerful. Also, on the Divine Skill turn, it is one of the things that can get the plus 10,000 after having the power set by Krysrain, which means you can just get the Divine Skill that little bit bigger. 2 copies of Adelheid, so, like I said, like, the first ability, always useful. Even if your opponent gets a defensive, you can kind of keep your numbers up. And then being able to, like, protect your back row against any kind of, like, mass removal deck, or things that have, like, more targeted removal. And the potential that, like, if you draw, or soul charge, or whatever, the, over-trigger, and it ends up in your drop zone, that does get you an additional attack, which could be a way of pushing for game. So, yeah, that's this build. The main thing about it is probably just the lack of countercharging. Like, I tried my best to address the power issue, like, first. So this deck is kind of filled with, like, power gaining and utility effects to, like, hopefully push the opponent for game. But yeah, in doing that, you kind of have to forego countercharging. If you really wanted to, you could probably adjust this to have a copy of Ingrid, probably cutting out a copy of the Jewel Beast and or only running 3 Yuikas. You could also maybe opt to cut Valshablan instead if you're like, you know what, actually, Pressure is enough for your early game, like, cycling. Next up, we have the Order build, or one of them. So this one opts to keep the Astasis ride line. We are running Ingrid now just because, like, searching out for Demon Core does require a counterblast. And then we replaced the generic grade 1 Albina with Ethnida to search out the Demon Core. So more or less functions the same way. Like, you activate the Demon Core, she gets the 5k, which kind of makes up for the booster, and then you can just kind of keep recycling the same copy of Demon Core. Everything else is kind of the same for the same reasons. We are running 1 more copy of Strega now, because we are running the 1 order that we plan to recycle over and over again. If you wanted to play additional orders just for a bit of insulation, you could maybe cut a copy of Anis and or Yuika. Like, I think the ratios are a bit more negotiable. And then, finally, I have, like, the more heavy order build. So this one uses the Willista ride line, because that gives you Illumirays early, which means if you draw Strega early and you search out the Illumirays, like, that gives you an early game combo to attack with. Unfortunately, it means you won't be able to, like, bounce things back to your hand with Demon Cord, because you can only activate the one order, but between Strega and, like, or with Strega and, like, Annis, you have different ways of getting to Ingrid, which then gives you the countercharging, so you can kind of, like, make up for the costs of playing the order package. We're also running a copy of the Grail now. Again, because we're kind of investing more into Strega with this build, I decided this should probably be enough orders to, like, last you throughout the game if you need to keep using Strega's ability. And then finally, we have what I call my best. So, in the interest of the poors, I would like to offer a budget option, and boy was that not easy, because, yeah, 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 yeah. So, we're trying. First things first, also kind of an order-heavy build, but unfortunately Strega is like $1 million, so we can't afford Strega in this version, but we are now playing Harmonious Offshoot to give the front row like 5k, basically. A second copy of Ingrid, just because we kind of have to. You can hopefully hit it off Annis. We're now adding in Virginia, because we gotta get 50 cards, and this is a countercharge, and it does kind of get you soul. So if you just happen to have... Honestly, this build does not need soul. Let's be real here. We cannot afford Yuika or Adelheid in this situation, so you're using the soul for nothing. This is a countercharge. And yeah. So that's that. That's kind of it for all of the different sample lists. Krysrain is a very interesting deck, and I do enjoy, like, thinking about it. There's a lot... Like I showed you, there are a lot of, like, different small things that you can do to the deck to try and, like, push it in different directions. And, you know, I do enjoy just kind of playing with it and trying out different things. It is not the best deck in the world, which is why there are so many, like, different minor changes I've been tinkering with, is because there's no real, like, optimized list, and there's always, like, some little problem to try and address. So, yeah. So this non-order build is what I was currently tinkering with at the time of recording this video. I do want to try out this, like, super order-heavy build with, like, the Willista Ride line and, like, the Demon Cord package. I want to see how that performs. Whether that'll end up being, like, weirdly bricky in ways that I can't predict, but we'll see. So, that'll be it for this video. Thank you for watching, everybody. Please let me know if you like this format of, like, deck discussion video, where I kind of go over all of the different card options that I can kind of think of, and then show off various different sample builds, and especially, of course, the, doing our best build with budget. But for now, that'll be it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye!